I'd like to talk a bit about how to level the clip volume against each other. It's quite likely that you may have clips from set that are just recorded at different volumes, so you're going to have mics coming in that need to be balanced out. So in order to demonstrate this, I've just got the workspace view so that the master meters are going right all the way up the length of the screen to get the full view there. And I've just shoved my audio track mixer and the faders and the inserts are over on the left-hand side just to show you here a better view. So I'm just going to expand out on this. You can really expand out on those tracks to make them appear really detailed. And of course you can zoom in and out as well, as per usual. So what we have here is 3 different clips, and we've got a sort of weak, a stronger, and then a sort of strongest signal. And we're just going to briefly mention a bit about each of them and how you go about deciding whether that is weak or that is strong, and how you go about mixing them against each other. So just going to play this, and we'll just keep an eye on the meters here as it plays. This is Maeve O'Connell's voice from the smartphone filming tutorial.
Sometimes a flare from the sun or light can be nice, but most phone lenses don't produce.
So you can see there the yellow indicates the peak audio level, and the rest of the green signal indicates real-time level of the dialogue as it's spoken. And the yellow is handy because it holds, so it shows you how high the audio waveform reached at its strength in the dialogue. So that was around about -30 or so, this kind of region. It's an inverse scale, so minus infinity up to -30. And you might say that's a bit weak. And the reason for that is because there's guidelines for mixing for broadcast that range around the -23 region for dialogue. So this here should be our average for broadcast. But if you're submitting your work here, it can more or less be within this sweet spot, this sweet range that we call the Goldilocks zone, in between -12 and -24. But for broadcast, we want our dialogue at -23. So -30 is 7 decibels lower than that region that we want to achieve there. So that is too weak. Let's play the second clip and see how that activates.
Photographs and movies are horizontal, not vertical, so turn your phone on its side.
So there we go. The second clip fluctuates between -24 and -18 peak, but we get that nice average of -23 with the level indicators there. So that's pretty bang on. And the third clip is probably going to be too strong because we can see that the waveform here in the clip view is higher. In other words, it's closer to the top of the clip, which means it's eating up more room of that headroom there before it reaches the point of distortion, which is 0 dB, which we call our ceiling. So let's just play this third clip and see how it performs.
Photo and cutting into the resolution. If you want a close-up, get closer. If you can't, it's better to crop the photo afterwards when you're editing.
So we're getting peak levels there up to about -7 dB. Now, the reason that I would say that is too loud is because we're eating up too much of this headroom here. We should always leave at least -12 dB of headroom so that if we have a loud sound effect, for example, a sound in the real world that is louder than the human voice, we need it to be above the dialogue level for impact. So we don't want to eat up all that headroom there with dialogue, so that any louder sound effects, and that might include music, by the way, but it could be an explosion or any sort of loud sound, the screeching of tires, a door slamming. We want those to be loud in our work, and it's just not going to be loud enough if we're going too high with the dialogue. So for broadcast, for example, the BBC, they like you to actually aim around about this region, -25 for the dialogue, and by putting in all those extra sound effects, you're increasing the overall loudness to about -23. But broadcasters like you to have what we call dynamics, which is difference between the quiet and the loud. And the only way to achieve that is to leave, at least 12, 15, 18, 21 dB here of space, headroom for louder sound effects. So that is why I would say that is too loud. However, for the purposes of uploading something to YouTube, like a tutorial, you might see them going up into this level just to save people adjusting their volume on their keyboard, but it's a different situation for broadcast, so just to bear that in mind. Now, these 3 clips are different volumes. To get back to what we're trying to do here, we want to level these out a bit so that more or less we've got the same level of dialogue to work with. And this especially because it's the same person, the same voice, we want it to be consistent. But if it was different characters, we'd still like that to be consistent so that there's no volume fluctuations, unless of course it's intended by the story. So the way to do this in a nutshell is just by right-clicking on a clip. Let's go with this quiet clip here. We can just right-click it, and then you just go to audio gain. And let's just talk about the options here. So it will default to, I think, the adjust gain amount, and that allows you to either boost it by entering positive values like 20. Okay, you'll see the effect there that it boosts it by 20 decibels. That has boosted that signal up to match that of the 3rd clip, so that's going to be peaking more or less up here now. But that's probably too much. I can show you as well that if you enter a negative value for your gain amount, which is using your numpad on your keyboard, negative, let's say 20, it will reduce that volume there. So be mindful of that. That is one option in terms of manually entering in the values that you want to increase or decrease it. But there's a much better way to do it, which is using this feature here called Normalize Max Peak. So what this does is it will scan that individual clip and it will look for the maximum value of any of the peaks. And it will adjust the entire volume of the clip evenly so that whichever peak is the loudest, so probably this first one here, you can see there's a peak just under the red icon there, and it will increase the whole volume of that clip so that that peak is just about under 0 dB, which is the point that you get distortion, because of course we don't want to go above that point. So that is a better option than selecting this one here, because if we say we want to normalize all peaks, it just might not change that volume evenly. So it's best to always select that to your max peak amount. So if I press OK now, it's going to increase the whole volume of that clip so that the maximum peak is just at 0 dB, which is where it will start to distort. And that's obviously way too loud, given that we just spoke about the headroom and respecting the dynamic range. So let's not do that. However, the really useful thing here is that we can manually select multiple clips, then right-click on the audio gain. We can what we call normalize all these peaks evenly so that it will scan the maximum peak of each of these clips and it will increase all of them so that their maximum value is just below 0. Now, if you've got loud pops or clicks in your recording, this might not work so well because it's sort of working off the premise that the maximum peak is actually usable dialogue or usable audio. So if you've got a boom operator who's making lots of noise, that sort of might ruin that normalization technique. But it's just handy to know that you can right-click and you can change all of these, or you could adjust all of them manually if you wanted to. Let's say you manually wanted to bump all of them up by 12 dB, and it will then do that as a sort of ratio, if you like. But I like the level of this middle clip. I think it's, for drama, I think it's a nice volume to respect the dynamic range. So I would like these clips to match the middle one. And in order to do that, I am going to simply, in this case, I'm going to manually adjust the gain of each of the clips until I get that sort of matching level. And then I can go on to process the clips using effect-based dynamic control, which is much more powerful. It tends not to be the best way to work if you're doing lots of command clicks and lots of keyframing in this way, because over the course of a big project, you'll end up just punching in a load of keyframes, whereas you're much better off using a compressor, which we lightly touch on in the effects video. But some people do like to punch in a lot of keyframes, particularly when they're first learning the program. All I would say is that that's fine for short projects, but not for larger projects. It ends up being a bad way to sort of spend your time and energy, if you like. But now hopefully you're all aware of how to balance these out so that they're more about the same level. And then once you've gotten at the same level, you can then go about normalizing them perhaps together, or you can adjust the gain together if you want to get that loud kind of YouTube tutorial type of a vibe. You can push them all up there. Just be aware of your headroom, and remember that if these clips are in a context of a lot of other sound effects, then you want to just be sort of a bit more conservative and stay in this sort of minus 24 to minus 18 region, and then your sound effects are going to have huge impact. Like when you think of a scary movie, the difference between the quiet and the loud noises are absolutely integral to the story being effective and you actually feeling the emotions that that content wants you to feel. So some people prefer to just click and drag the audio gain line here, which gives you up to 6 extra decibels. And if you drag it all the way to the bottom, it minus infinity will completely mute out the file there. So some people do prefer to do it that way. So yeah, just bear in mind, if you have two clips of different volumes up against each other, then there may be a jump in the background noise floor, which is the kind of static hiss, which you don't want happening, especially if there's no cut to the picture. You don't want the background noise floor all of a sudden changing during a shot. It doesn't make any sense. You might get away with that if it goes from an interior to an exterior, for example, but it needs to be right on the frame when you're doing those. And if you want to do a transition, you have to use this constant power technique. This gives you a nice sort of linear, natural sounding fade from one clip to the next. And if you're fading from static to static, that volume may change in such a way that it's not quite perceivable to the listener. So those crossfades using the constant power technique are really handy in terms of smoothing out any potential problems, clicks, pops, and issues that you get when you're dealing with audio files of different gain amounts up against each other. I recommend doing that whenever you can.